Hi everyone, my name is Valentina Guido, Senior Associate at RMI and guest host on the Energy Talk podcast, where we tell stories about Africa's energy transition. In this episode, we will talk about the experience of women in clean energy through the lens of the Africa Minigrids Program, AMP, and the RMI Global Women in Clean Energy Fellowship Program that recently launched its first cohort in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zambia. This RMI program is a comprehensive capacity building program aiming to catalyze women-led clean energy project implementation and an inclusive energy transition. The African cohort involves 50 women leading distributed energy resources projects. The online technical training and mentorship sessions will wrap up in December with an in-person leadership accelerator. The next cohort of the RMI Global Women in Clean Energy Fellowship is set to launch in November in Indonesia. The cohort similarly will involve early career women professionals in energy and clean energy, passionate about leading the future of Indonesia's energy transition. The need for this fellowship program was made apparent after our needs assessment comprising over 100 women in the field across Africa. We heard that women still face barriers preventing them from assessing leadership positions in the clean energy space. We also heard excitement for existing programs supporting women and a need for more technical training, mentorship, and networking opportunities for women working on mini-grids, solar, hydropower, and other clean energy projects. So based on this, we designed this empowering fellowship in collaboration with global and local experts. You can look at the complete needs assessment findings in the show notes of this episode, where you'll also find more details about the current cohort in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zambia. I'm also excited to announce that as part of the AMP work, the RMI and UNDP teams are launching an internal working group within the AMP community focused on building capacity around gender action plans. Gender action plans are strategic documents outlining objectives and actions to achieve gender equality within mini-grid project implementation, both in terms of participation and beneficiaries. When it comes to integrating gender considerations, though, the level of ambition and progress within each AMP country differs quite significantly. And we identified the need to share best practices to support AMP countries in the development and implementation of these plans. This is what the working group, as part of the AMP community of practice, aims to do. The next segment you will hear is an exchange between myself and Chigozie, co-host and producer on the podcast. This was the last day of the Energy Access Investment Forum in Kampala, at the end of our recording session that featured 3 women of the AMP. This is part 1 of a 2-part series exploring the role of women in the clean energy surge in Africa, and more about the Global Women in Clean Energy Fellowship.
So, welcome, Valentina. It's been an interesting couple of days and an interesting couple of conversations that you've had with the women of the AMP. I'll just give the floor to you. What motivated us to actually delve into these conversations? And what did you find in terms of insights from the conversations that you've had so far?
Yes, it's been a very busy couple of days here at the Energy Access Investment Forum in Kampala. We gathered the community of practice of the Africa Minigrids Program as RMI and UNDP for the second time. So a similar convening happened last year in Lagos. And this was the second chance for the community of practice of the AMP to get together and exchange knowledge, exchange progress on the implementation of their respective mini-grid projects across the different implementing countries, and really learn from each other, surface outstanding questions. And as part of this, we also hosted a couple of specific targeted conversations with a few of the participating women of the Africa Minigrids Program. So we wanted to have that conversation to really get a first-hand report of what it feels to be a woman in a field where, and by field I mean clean energy and energy more broadly as well, a field where women are still underrepresented.
Zooming into the gender initiatives of the AMP and the research work that you guys have done, could you expand a little bit on the findings from the reports, some of the core motivations for the program, and then what the outcomes are for you and the team moving forward?
So I'll try to clarify, because a lot of this work intersects and overlaps, but then there's also kind of separate initiatives that each organization is working on. The series of interviews we conducted last year were aimed at building on the Africa Minigrids Program network across, as I said, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zambia. So the goal there was really to understand what gaps these women face in the clean energy sector and what are the obstacles, if any, that are preventing them from entering the sector and then being better represented when it comes to leadership positions. Because I think the specific issue is that there's not enough female representation in the sector, but even less so in leadership positions. And we know that, of course, decisions get made in boardrooms where women are still not represented equally, very far actually from being represented equally. So we know that representation matters because it leads to decisions and outcomes that favor the minority that is being represented, right? So that's the goal that we're working towards across both the work that we're doing with the AMP, the Africa Minigrids Program, and the work that RMI also does in terms of capacity building and creating a renewable energy space, a clean energy space where women can thrive and can achieve leadership positions.
Perfect.
So we did that consultation at the end of last year to understand these gaps and the type of support available. And as we recently published, the data shows the biggest obstacles and the biggest gaps that these women reported mainly concern the lack of training, technical training, and the lack of mentorship and networking opportunities. These really came up across a lot of the conversations, and women across the 3 countries I mentioned expressed a desire for more opportunities. And that's not to say that these opportunities don't exist yet. I think there was a lot of excitement for a lot of the great work that is already happening and being delivered on the ground. What we heard was more of a desire for more opportunities and more of these training, more of these mentorship opportunities, just recognizing that there's still demand that has not been met for these type of trainings and opportunities. With that in mind, RMI's Energy Transition Academy, which is our capacity building branch, we have taken all that information that we gathered throughout those conversations and survey that we circulated and are now in the process of designing a fellowship program that we actually just announced, titled Global Women in Clean Energy Fellowship. And it will be the first edition taking place in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zambia, which will aim at meeting some of that demand and some of that desire for further technical training, networking opportunities, mentorship opportunities, as well as leadership skill training. We are designing a fellowship program that will provide a mix of these activities to around 50 women across Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zambia. And again, these are all AMP countries. So the idea is to build on the AMP network and to involve, of course, the women of the AMP in this fellowship. But then building on that, also reaching some of the other women that we talked to and some of the other women in the sector across the 3 countries. Build on the efforts that are already being delivered on the ground and help connect some of the dots and reinforce the work that it's already been done. Now you will hear from Shamiso, Program Analyst for Energy with the UNDP Malawi Country Office. Thank you to the AMP team for giving us the space and the opportunity to feature their experts in this episode.
I think being a program analyst, too often I get immersed in the administrative side of it, the cogs and the wheels, and I don't get to go into the field as much, and sometimes impact kind of becomes a distant sort of things. But one of the panels that I sat in to listen to yesterday was on healthcare electrification. And that is something that is very close to me because in the context of Malawi, it's something that is so very common to the point that people even take it for granted. This issue of maternal deaths in rural health centers, all for the sake of lack of electricity in some of these places. So just hearing that brings me back to, it actually brought me back to why I do what I do.
Thank you for sharing. That's touching and that's very inspiring. I agree. sometimes we forget how intersectional the topic of energy access and climate change more broadly are.
Yeah.
So I agree, sessions like that can really remind us of the importance of the work that we do. Yeah. Thank you. We would love to hear a bit more about your role. You mentioned a little bit already, but yeah, really curious to hear more about your role, the work that you're doing, and what your typical day in the office looks like.
All right. So as program analyst, I lead on the thematic area of energy, meaning all energy programming for the UNDP Country Office goes through me. We've got several projects, one of which is the Africa Minigrids Program, which we're participating in. And a typical day will involve a lot of admin, a lot of strategy sessions, some policy advisory, and the occasional field trip when I can make room in my calendar. And that's always my favorite part, actually getting to see the impact on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I want to go back to the AMP work, the Africa Minigrids Program work that you mentioned, and some of the other work that you do.
Mhm.
But before we do that, I am curious to hear more how you got into the clean energy space and what drew you to this space to start with. How did your career start?
So my bachelor's degree is in computer engineering, but funnily enough, my final year project had nothing to do with computer engineering, not really. I think I picked my project last. So the only one that was applicable to me and available was one on developing an alternative fuel system for the developing world. So going through that, and also from the perspective of where I come from, and just getting to now put the statistics to it and actually start to understand how much of an impact all of this has long-term to the development of our country, that's what actually then made me pivot. And so I didn't get into the energy space straight away.
Mm-hmm.
I then turned my focus to sustainability as a whole. So my first job was actually as an environmental officer for a manufacturing company. So it was while there working it as an environmental officer, obviously doing a lot of environmental management and energy efficiency work. That's when I also started to develop an interest and a passion for the energy space. And while there, that's when I also joined the Malawi, well, now it's known as the Malawi Engineering Institution.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I got my first platform to begin energy advocacy work. And yeah, never looked back since.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
That's a really exciting path that you've been on. We know that the energy space is a space where women are not yet equally and fully represented, especially in the clean energy space.
Sure.
And especially leadership positions.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you faced any challenge around this topic, around, being a woman in a clean energy space, and if so, how did you navigate them?
I think coming from an engineering background, I didn't feel it as much because even as a student, an engineering student in a class of about 80 students, I think we were about 6 females. So it was a context that I was already familiar with, but it wasn't until my first job.
Mm-hmm.
So very male-dominated space, working in a factory. I was young, intimidated, and nobody would take me seriously. So to actually try and roll out programs that people would actually say, okay, fine, this makes sense, let's give it a shot. It wasn't easy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you find that any specific skills or tools, resources, strategies helped you feel more seen and heard and taken into account, if any?
I think the most important skill that I can say that I've honed in over time is people management. So learning how to relate to people always helps you to find a way to get things done. Learning to understand people's perspective, where they're coming from. Yeah.
Yes, definitely empathy as a part of that. I can imagine understanding where others are coming from.
Yeah.
I was wondering if skills like communication, leadership, skills of, any sorts also made you feel like you were able to take progressively more charge and more accountability in the situation.
Communication, definitely. Leadership, I was kind of just thrown into the deep end on that one. That wasn't something I was trained on. It's something that I still have to learn on a day-to-day basis and whatever role I'm in.
Yeah, definitely. The learning never stopped.
Yeah.
Were there capacity building programs or leadership skills development programs that you had available that you could rely on? Or did you feel like the sector, the people around you could have done a better job of providing those tools and that support?
In my first job, no. But currently with UNDP, yes, those tools are readily available. You've got so much access and support where if you feel like you're lacking, you've got a whole section of learning management that can help guide you even in the fields that you yourself might have a blind spot to. Yeah.
That's awesome. I asked the question because as part of my work at RMI, I do a lot of capacity building work, capacity building program design and delivery. We work closely with women across sub-Saharan Africa to understand their needs, to design programs, fellowship programs that can help empower them and make them feel equipped with the resources and tools and skills that they need. So I was curious to hear your experience having access to that type of support.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm curious, going back to the AMP work, to the Africa Minigrids Program work, which is part of the work that you do at UNDP. If you were introducing the program to a young woman just beginning her career, how would you describe the program and its potential to create inclusive energy access?
That's a tough one. I think I would begin by presenting the opportunities that energy access gives. And then go on to say that AMP is looking at developing business models that would be able to bring rural energy access to be able to develop the economic activity of these communities. It also is looking at the policies and the regulatory frameworks that will be able to support this work. And in all of that, as a woman, when it comes to the energy access itself, there are targets in order to make sure that women are empowered and they have access to all the opportunities that energy access would be given to any community member. And then at a policy level, at a national level, to make sure that they are also accounted for and included in all the policies and all the regulations as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper there and hear some more specifics, some more details about current or past AMP-related projects or initiatives that you've worked on where you felt like the gender equality aspect was really well integrated and built in. What are some of these initiatives that you've seen before or that you're currently working on?
Okay, so as a result of some of the work that we've been doing under AMP when it comes to developing business models, financially viable business models for mini-grids, and some of the policy and regulatory framework support that we've been given, we've also had the opportunity from UNDP Sustainable Energy Hub to develop a new program called Powering Equality. And this program's sole purpose was to focus on women's empowerment. So going to all the AMP sites that we had already established and forming cooperatives, training these women in business management with business management skills, and actually, in some cases, even going as far as procuring equipment for them to be able to then sustain some sort of a livelihood independent of, say, their husbands. And not only that, but again, at a policy level, the national energy policy for Malawi was due to be revised, is being revised actually. And that was one of the initiatives that we really pushed through this power inequality, to make sure that gender mainstreaming was emphasized, to make sure that we had clear gender targets, to also push for gender disaggregated data for end of year reporting. And yeah, I'm excited to see what results we get, especially at the end of this year, having done all that groundwork.
That's super exciting. Yes, that's a lot of work that you're leading, and it sounds like you're really setting the bar high for what it means to integrate gender into energy access work. Is the end of the year you mentioned, is that the kind of deadline for this Powering Equality initiative?
No. So on the women's empowerment side, these women are already thriving. They're already making a lot of money from some of the equipment that we supplied to them. But when I was talking about end of year, I was more looking at the gender disaggregated data, because that's something that we always struggle with when collecting data for end of year reporting. Yeah.
Interesting. I'd love to hear a bit more on the data aspect, but also you mentioned the policy aspect and the capacity building aspect. I'd love to hear more about how you as UNDP work with other stakeholders in the ecosystem to advance all those different work streams. And we can take them maybe one by one, would be easier.
Yes,
so
please.
Yeah, let's focus on data, capacity building, and policy and frameworks.
Okay, so data, it's something that is almost a selfish ambition, because it's something that we need for our internal end-of-year reporting. So it works to our advantage to make sure that all our stakeholders are well-equipped when it comes to data collection, ensuring the accuracy of that data. So we've supported the National Statistics Office on multiple occasions in terms of conducting, like last year, because we're in 2025 now. Last year, we supported them to do a multi-tier framework, which is actually something that hadn't been done for a while. And that actually gave us some really interesting statistics when it comes to energy access and the different tiers. So yeah, that's definitely one success. Capacity building. Again, for Malawi, the renewable energy space is relatively new. Even to say that having renewable energy targets, I can only say those were set in 2017 originally, when the National Energy Policy was first revised, and that initial revision then came with the development of the Malawi Renewable Energy Strategy. So there's had to be a lot of work done in terms of building capacity in the ministry, building capacity with the regulator, because we also have a very close working relationship with them, and just across the sector as a whole. So there are several different training programs that we have initiated throughout our different energy programs through the years. And lastly, policy. I'll circle back to the regulator because of some of the work that we've done. So as I've mentioned, the National Energy Policy and the Malawi Renewable Energy Strategy, those are documents that UNDP supported the development of. Through the regulator, we also supported the development of the Minigrid regulatory framework. And we've supported several other policy and regulatory frameworks through the years, and just trying to lay the foundation for an enabling environment that would also allow us to then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, now that we have all this policy, how then can we move forward in terms of bridging that energy access gap?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for that. So we talked about working with different stakeholders across the ecosystem. I also wanted to go back to something you mentioned before, which is, working with women in the field especially. And I imagine that based on the cultural context and the very specific contexts and situations, there may be different degrees to which women are comfortable and empowered to work in the energy sector, in the mini-grid sector, renewable energy sector more broadly. And I'm wondering how your team, so especially those working in the field, if you know this and based on your experience, how your team navigates those dynamics, especially when sensitive cultural dynamics are at play.
Yeah, so culture is also a very big one. Culturally, the woman is responsible for cooking as a whole. And as a result, most girls don't get to go to school in rural areas. They're told to stay home. They're told to go collect the firewood. That's all they know. So to move from that, it's something that has taken a lot of awareness campaigns, but also even as we've moved, also having champions in some of the success communities that we've had. I think one that comes to mind is a woman in one of the villages that we actually developed a mini-grid, who once she had access to electricity was now she built a grocery. She powers a cooling system so people can have access to cold drinks, and she's been able to sustain her home, and not only that, but also send her kids to school, good schools. So having people like that actually tell their story. And we've actually done a couple of vlogs with her to just make sure that her story is heard throughout the country. And also just generally trying to encourage girls and women to move into this space, because again, culturally, this isn't a space that most women would be naturally inclined to step into.
Yeah.
But as we're progressing in this work, there are several bodies that are actively trying to integrate women into their leadership roles. And it's slow, but at least it's something that they're conscious of, and it's something that's moving in the right direction.
Yeah. I love what you just said, and I'm so excited that as part of the work that we do at AMP, we also make sure that we spotlight champions of the month in general, that also we make sure that we give the necessary visibility to women champions of the AMP. So that's a series that we have available on the AMP website, and across the board, something that I've heard in my work as well when consulting with women working in the renewable energy space, the clean energy space in general. A lot of those I talk to also voice this desire to have role models to look up to have more visibility for women in the space, so that we can inspire more and more girls to start their careers in the space and then to grow in the space. Thank you. Thank you. That was very inspiring. Another follow-up question I had was around how you see this gender mainstreaming work evolving under AMP and the work that you're doing at UNDP. So just looking at some of the work that you described, how do you see that evolving and moving forward into the next, let's say, 5 years as you work towards those very ambitious goals that you mentioned?
Yeah, in the next 5 years, the hope is to actually have a national energy policy that has concrete gender objectives and goals, and quotas for certain areas within the energy space, and not just for the sake of it, but to actually make sure that they're looking at the entire, I don't want to use it to say supply chain, but to look at it even from the universities, to make sure they're nurturing that talent and building that capacity, to make sure that these women, these girls are qualified to be able to fill leadership positions in the ministry, in the regulatory space. And I actually have to applaud our regulator, Malawi Energy Regulatory Authority, because they are ones who drive this quite a lot. They have several women in very high leadership positions. Same thing goes for our national utility generating company, women in high positions who have gone through this and are actually amazing, inspirational examples for women and girls across the country.
I'm very glad to hear all of that. I was also wondering, in the context of all of this exciting work that's happening and progress that we're witnessing, I was wondering if there's any concrete next steps or immediate high potential, high value unlocks that you would encourage the clean energy sector to focus on. Maybe is it collaboration? Is it more capacity building? Is it what feels most urgent to you as you look at this vision and hope for the future of clean energy across Africa, and of course, as a part of that, working towards gender equality and women's leadership in the space?
Yeah, I think the biggest win would always be more at grassroots level for me, to be able to see more women in rural areas who aren't as reliant, who are more self-sufficient as a result of the energy access that's been granted to them. But yes, at a higher level, yes, to also be able to see at least a 50-50 representation of women leadership and in government and in all of the parastatals across the country.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I often think about this and often am mindful of this. I think it's important to remember and to remind others that empowering women and working towards gender equality does not mean and should not mean that we're leaving boys behind or that we're not discriminating against men in return. So I was curious to hear your thoughts on what is often referred to as male allyship and how can men and women work together in the sector to work towards the shared goal of gender equality.
So for that one, I'll give the example of when I was a fresh graduate. I had the qualifications and I should have easily been able to get a job, but it was a struggle. And it wasn't until a male mentor actually took my CV and sat down and started to guide me and say, okay, look, this is what you need to target. These are the entry points, that I started to sort of understand better. So I guess this is what we need more of, because he wasn't doing that in a condescending sort of manner. And he's somebody that I call a colleague and friend today. So we need more of those who will be able to encourage women and to be able to help inspire them to say, no, look, you've got the qualifications and you're capable. This is a space that you can step into.
I love that. Yeah, I think mentorship is so crucial.
Yeah.
It's so important to have someone believe in you when you don't even believe in yourself at the beginning of your career, when you're unsure how to move forward. So I think alongside what we already mentioned in terms of building those skills and giving visibility to women in the space so that other women can feel inspired and girls can feel inspired to start a career, I think mentorship is also another crucial factor that can help advance gender equality in the space. And another element that I also heard often in consultations with women working in the Africa Minigrids Program and beyond in RMI's network across sub-Saharan Africa. So yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. So to bring all these elements together and inspire confidence, I'm curious what advice you would give to young women who are maybe thinking about starting a career in clean energy but are not sure how to start.
Maybe this will sound simplistic, but just start. There are so many different pathways into the clean energy space, but all it takes is that first bold step to say, this is something that I really want to do. and to believe that this is something I can do. Yeah.
That's great. It can sometimes the best advice can be simple. And just a quick follow-up on that, are there any resources or networks that you would recommend to these young women considering a career in clean energy? Anything that helped you particularly feel more confident as you were taking your first steps?
In my first steps, of course, it's not necessarily clean energy related, but it was Engineers Without Borders that helped me become a bit more confident in some of the work that I was doing. In the Malawi context, we've got several different initiatives that actually focus on encouraging young women into that space. As a spin-off from the Malawi Engineering Institution that I mentioned, we have a specifically women's chapter that's dedicated to inspiring women and girls across universities across the country. So, and energy engineering is one of the programs of study across several of the universities. So, yeah, the future is bright.
Thank you. And on that note of hope, I want to thank you so much for taking the time for this interview during the Energy Investment Access Forum here in Kampala. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you, Shamiso.
No, thank you, Valentina.